5 unsolved crimes that left the world with no answers. Hinterkaifeck murders Germany, 1922. A farm, a family, and footsteps in the snow. In the early spring of 1922, on an isolated Bavarian farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, something deeply unsettling unfolded. Something that still refuses to be explained. The farm sat between the small towns of Grobern and Weidhofen, surrounded by forest and fields. It was remote, quiet, the kind of place where nothing unusual was supposed to happen. But in the days leading up to the murders, strange things did. The family living on the farm were Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, Kazilia Gruber, his wife, 72 years old, Victoria Gabriel, their widowed daughter, 35 years old, Kazilia Gabriel, Victoria's daughter, 7 years old, Joseph, Victoria's young son, 2 years old, and Maria Baumgartner, the new maid, 44 years old. 6 people. By April 4th, 1922, all 6 were dead. The warnings. Days before the killings, Andreas Gruber told neighbors about strange occurrences. Footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the farm, but none leading back. Sounds in the attic at night, like someone moving. A missing set of house keys. A newspaper from Munich that no one in the family had purchased. The previous maid had quit months earlier, claiming the house was haunted. Gruber searched the property, but found nothing. Whatever was there stayed hidden. The night of the murders. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, the killer began. One by one, for members of the family were lured into the barn. There, in the darkness, they were murdered with a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. Investigators believe Andreas was killed first, then his wife, later Victoria, and then young Kazilia. The little girl reportedly survived for hours after the attack. Evidence suggested she tore out her own hair in distress before dying in the straw. Inside the farmhouse, the killer then murdered Maria Baumgartner in her bed, 2-year-old Joseph in his cradle. 6 victims. No witnesses. No screams heard by neighbors. The most disturbing detail. The killer did not flee. Evidence strongly suggests the murderer remained on the farm for days after the killings. The livestock were fed. Meals were prepared. Smoke rose from the chimney. The dog was cared for, and bread was freshly cut. Whoever did this lived among the bodies. Discovery. The family was not discovered until April 4th, 1922, when concerned neighbors came looking after the children failed to appear at school. They entered the barn first. What they found inside shocked, even hardened investigators. The bodies were stacked, partially covered with hay. The farmhouse was silent. The investigation. Police from Munich arrived. More than 100 suspects were questioned over the years. None were convicted. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed it was robbery. But money was left untouched. Others suspected a personal motive. Andreas Gruber had a history of violence and had previously been convicted of incest with his daughter Victoria. Some theorized Joseph's paternity may have been disputed. One neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, was heavily suspected. He had a close relationship with Victoria and may have been Joseph's father. His behavior at the crime scene raised suspicions, but there was never enough proof. The original farm was demolished in 1923. Over 100 years later, this case remains officially unsolved. West Mesa Murders. Albuquerque, New Mexico, 2009. A stretch of desert. A police search for a missing woman, and beneath the sand, something far worse than anyone expected. The discovery. On February 2nd, 2009, a woman walking her dog in the desert on Albuquerque's West Mesa noticed something disturbing protruding from the ground. It was not trash. It was not animal remains. It was human bone. Police secured the area. As they began digging, the horror expanded. One body was found, then another, and then another. By the end of the excavation, 11 women had been found buried in shallow graves across the barren mesa. They had been there for years. The victims. The women were mostly in their teens and 20s. Many involved in sex work and several struggling with addiction. Many from vulnerable communities, including Hispanic and Native backgrounds. Most had gone missing between 2003 and 2005. Their disappearances had not drawn major headlines at the time. Now, they were linked together in death. The pattern. Investigators determined the women were strangled. They were buried in the same remote area. The graves were shallow but deliberate, and the killer likely knew the terrain well. The burial site was near a new housing development. Construction had likely disturbed the ground, bringing the remains closer to the surface. For years, the killer had hidden them in plain sight. Two suspects emerges. Attention soon focused on these men, Lorenzo Montoya and Joseph Blee. Joseph Blee became a person of interest because of several troubling overlaps, but he has never been charged in the case. Joseph Blee was later convicted in 2017 for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of a 9-year-old girl in Albuquerque in 1988. That conviction showed he was capable of extreme violence. He had lived in the Albuquerque area during the time the West Mesa victims disappeared. He had a long criminal background involving sexual offenses. Once he was arrested and DNA linked him to the 1988 cold case, investigators began reviewing whether he could be connected to other unsolved crimes, including West Mesa, but no charges followed. Lorenzo Montoya was a convicted sex offender living in Albuquerque. In December 2006, Montoya lured a 19-year-old woman, Sharika Hill, to his trailer in Albuquerque. Inside, he strangled and bound her body. Her boyfriend, Frederick Williams, had dropped her off and waited outside. After becoming suspicious, he went inside, saw what was happening, and shot Montoya. Williams claimed he acted in self-defense during a confrontation. When Montoya allegedly pulled a gun on him, Montoya died at the scene. Police found a strangled woman in his trailer after the shooting. Montoya had ties to the West Mesa area. He fit the profile, but he was already dead, and no physical evidence ever conclusively linked him to the 11 victims. To this day, he remains a primary suspect, but not an officially confirmed killer. Where the case stands today, more than a decade later, no one has been charged. New forensic methods continue to be explored. The FBI has assisted. The case remains open. The desert has grown over the gravesite. Houses now stand nearby. But beneath that quiet landscape lies one of New Mexico's most haunting mysteries. The Isdal woman, Norway, 1970. In a cold, rocky valley known as Isdalen, nicknamed Death Valley by locals, a father and his 2 daughters stumbled upon a partially burned body. What they found would become one of Europe's most haunting unsolved mysteries. The scene. The woman's body lay among stones, badly burned. Around her were strange items. A plastic bottle that smelled like gasoline, a partly burned umbrella, rubber boots, a wristwatch, and sleeping pills scattered nearby. The fire had damaged her beyond easy recognition. But what truly unsettled investigators was not just how she died. It was who she might have been. No identity. Police quickly discovered that all clothing labels had been carefully removed. Her fingerprints were filed off or obscured by burns. She carried no identification. At the Bergen railway station, investigators found 2 suitcases connected to her. Inside were wigs in different styles, multiple pairs of sunglasses, foreign currencies, and a coded notebook filled with strange letter combinations. Every label in the suitcases had also been removed. It was as if someone had erased her from existence. The coded notebook. The notebook contained entries like 023.P5.B7. At first, they made no sense. Later, investigators believed they corresponded to dates and cities across Europe, places where the woman had stayed under different names. She had checked into hotels across Norway, Germany, Belgium, and Switzerland, using at least 8 different aliases. Each time, she paid in cash and she left quietly. Witness accounts. Hotel staff described her as well-dressed, elegant, fluent in multiple languages, and a secretive person. Some said she would abruptly change rooms. Others reported seeing her meet unidentified men. One witness claimed she told them she was traveling for business. Another said she seemed nervous and always watching people carefully. How did she die? She had high levels of barbiturates, sleeping pills, in her system. Carbon monoxide was found in her lungs, which means she was alive when the fire started. There were bruises on her neck. Officially, her death was ruled a likely suicide. But many details did not fit. Why remove all labels? Why use false names? Why travel constantly? Why the wigs? Why coded notes? And why die in such a remote location? The spy theory. Because this occurred during the Cold War. So many believe she may have been involved in espionage. Norway was strategically important due to NATO military activity and proximity to the Soviet Union. Theories include she was a spy gathering military intelligence. She was a courier or double agent, and she was silenced. Norwegian intelligence services were reportedly involved in parts of the investigation, though many records remain sealed. The burial. In 1971, the unknown woman was buried in Bergen with a Catholic funeral. It was attended by police and military representatives. Even in death, her name remained unknown. Her grave marker simply reflects that she was unidentified. Modern developments. In 2016, the case was reopened. Advanced DNA testing suggested she may have grown up in Central Europe, possibly Germany or France. Her jaw and dental work indicated extensive dental procedures, possibly done in Southern Europe. But even with modern science, no confirmed identity has been established. More than 50 years later, she has no name, no known family, no confirmed nationality, just questions. Zodiac Killer. Northern California, 1968. A shadow moved through lovers' lanes and quiet neighborhoods. He wrote letters, and he wanted the world to watch. The first attack. Lake Herman Road, 1968. On December 20th, 1968. Two teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, were shot to death while parked on a remote road near Vallejo. There were no witnesses, no motive, just shell casings in the dark. At the time, it looked like a tragic, isolated double homicide, but it was not. The second attack. Blue Rock Springs, 1969. On July 4th, 1969, another couple was attacked in their car. Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau. Mageau survived, but Farron died. Shortly after the shooting, a man called police and calmly reported the crime, and he confessed to the earlier Lake Herman Road murders. Weeks later, letters arrived at newspapers. They were signed with a strange symbol, a circle crossed by lines, and a name. This is the Zodiac speaking. The letters and ciphers. The killer sent taunting letters to newspapers, including the San Francisco Chronicle. Some contained cryptograms, complex coded messages. One cipher was solved quickly. Another, known as the 340 cipher, remained unsolved for over 50 years until private codebreakers cracked it in 2020. In the letters, he claimed responsibility for murders, threatened school bus attacks, demanded his cipher be printed, and described collecting slaves for the afterlife. He craved attention and wanted everyone to fear him. Lake Berryessa, 1969. In September 1969, a man wearing a black hooded costume approached a couple picnicking near Lake Berryessa. The hood had the Zodiac symbol stitched on the chest. He tied them up and stabbed them repeatedly. Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell. Cecilia Shepard later died, and Brian Hartnell survived. Before leaving, the killer wrote dates of his previous murders on the victim's car door, as if signing his work. San Francisco. Paul Stein, 1969. In October 1969, taxi driver Paul Stein was shot in San Francisco. The killer tore a piece of Stein's shirt and later mailed it to prove he was responsible. Police may have briefly stopped a suspect that night, but due to a dispatch error describing the suspect as black instead of white, the man was released. The suspects. Over the decades, many names have surfaced. The most famous suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. He had a criminal history and he lived near attack sites. He owned a Zodiac-style watch and was identified by some witnesses, but his fingerprints did not conclusively match. DNA evidence was inconclusive and he denied involvement until his death in 1992. Other suspects have emerged, but none proven. How many victims? Officially linked, 5 dead, 2 survivors. But in letters, Zodiac claimed to have killed 37. Whether that was truth or ego remains unknown. Why it still haunts America. The Zodiac was not just a murderer. He was a performer. He manipulated the media. He taunted the police. He controlled the narrative, turned terror into spectacle, and then he stopped writing. No confirmed Zodiac letters after the mid-1970s. No arrest. No identity. Just silence. Circleville letters. Circleville, Ohio, 1977. A quiet farming town, church-going families, and Friday night football. Then the letters began. Handwritten. block print, no return address. Each one filled with accusations, and whoever wrote them seemed to know everything. The first target. The harassment started with Mary Gillespie, a local school bus driver. The letters accused her of having an affair with the school superintendent. They were not vague threats, but they were detailed, personal, intimate. They were also sent to her husband, Ron Gillespie, the superintendent, neighbors, and co-workers. The writer demanded Mary confess or face exposure. Soon, the entire town was whispering. The escalation. In August 1977, Ron Gillespie received a phone call. He left home with a gun. Hours later, he was dead. His truck crashed into a tree. Officials ruled it an accident. But many in Circleville believed he had gone to confront the anonymous letter writer. The letters did not stop coming. They multiplied. Hundreds of them. They targeted public officials, teachers, families, and even children. The writer seemed obsessed with moral corruption. The booby trap. In 1983, Mary Gillespie noticed a strange sign along her bus route. It accused her publicly of the alleged affair. When she tried to remove it, she discovered something terrifying. Behind the sign was a loaded gun rigged to fire if it was disturbed. It was a trap. If she hadn't noticed it in time, she could have been killed. The gun was traced to a man named Paul Freshour. He was Mary's brother-in-law. The arrest. Paul Freshour was charged with attempted murder for the booby trap. He maintained his innocence, and he claimed he was being framed. Despite questionable evidence and no direct proof, he wrote the letters. He was convicted in 1984 and sentenced to prison. But here's where it gets disturbing. The letters continued. Even after Freshour went to prison, the letters kept coming. Postmarked from Columbus, Ohio. Sent to the same victims, same handwriting style, same tone, and same intimate knowledge. How could he be writing them from behind bars? Freshour was released in 1994. He denied writing the letters until his death in 2012. No one else was ever charged. The theories. Over the decades, theories have included a single obsessive vigilante, multiple writers, a conspiracy within the town, someone framing Paul Freshour, someone with access to deeply personal information. Some believe the affair may have actually been real, and that the letter writer felt morally justified. Others believe it was pure malice. Across different countries, across different decades, across completely different motives, the silence is what connects them. In Hinterkaifeck murders, a family was slaughtered on a remote farm, and the killer may have lived among their bodies before disappearing into history. In the West Mesa murders, 11 women were buried beneath desert sand, and someone may have lived among their bodies before disappearing into history. In the Isdal woman case, a woman erased her identity so completely that even in death, she remains a question mark. In the Zodiac killer case, a murderer turned fear into spectacle, taunting authorities, manipulating headlines, and vanishing without a name. In the Circleville letters, a town was psychologically terrorized for years by someone who may have been standing in plain sight the entire time. Each story leaves behind something unfinished. A footprint in the snow, a shallow grave in the desert, a coded notebook, a cipher no one can fully decode, and a letter with no return address. Time moves forward, families age, investigators retire, and evidence fades. But these cases remain suspended, frozen at the moment where answers should have come, but did not. And that may be the most unsettling truth of all. Some crimes do not end. They echo. Subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts.